A family is not just a collection of shared names and holiday photographs. It is a vault. It begins long before our first breath and endures long after our bones return to the dust. We are raised to revere this vault. We are taught to look at the faded, sepia-toned portraits hanging in the hallway and see love, resilience, and honor. We trust the stories told over quiet dinners. We believe in the identity handed down to us by the people who held our hands when we were children. But what happens when that entire foundation is built upon a catastrophic, unforgivable lie? What if the warm, smiling eyes in those old photographs were merely a meticulously constructed camouflage, a human mask designed to conceal a horror so profound that the law never found it and the earth was forced to swallow it? Tonight, we step past the decorative heirlooms and unlock the heavy iron doors of the family crypt. We are investigating 3 documented, deeply disturbing accounts of individuals who uncovered the absolute truth about their own bloodline. These are not urban legends. These are the terrifying logs of human beings who realized that the greatest monsters don't hide in the woods outside. They sit across from you at the dinner table, calling you by your name. Turn off your lights, check your doors, and let us descend into the dark history of blood.
It's lovely to finally have everyone together.
Yes, it really is.
Our first account begins with an inheritance, but not the kind measured in land or gold. It is the story of a woman named Clara, who, in the late autumn of 2021, came into possession of a sprawling, mid-19th century estate in rural Massachusetts following the death of her last surviving relative, her enigmatic aunt, Eleanor. The estate, known locally as the Blackwood Manor, was a towering Gothic relic of weathered oak, suffocated by decades of untamed ivy and forgotten memories. Eleanor had lived there as a recluse for over 40 years, rarely stepping beyond the rusting iron gates. To the family, she was simply the eccentric, quiet aunt who had chosen a life of solitary devotion to the ancestral grounds. Clara, tasked with cataloging the massive estate before its pending sale, moved into the cold, silent rooms. For the first 2 weeks, the process was tedious but predictable. She sorted through silver cutlery, boxes of yellowed deeds, and stacks of Victorian literature. It was on a rain-slicked Tuesday night that Clara decided to clear out the uppermost level of the house, the grand attic. The attic was a labyrinth of dust, dominated by heavy mahogany wardrobes, brass trunks, and covered furniture that resembled shrouded corpses in the dim beam of her tactical light. As Clara navigated to the furthest east wing of the space, a section where the ceiling sloped so low she had to crouch, she noticed a structural inconsistency in the floorboards and the wall paneling. Behind a heavy, dust-covered wardrobe that took her nearly 20 minutes to pry away from the wall, Clara found a heavy cedar door. It was not a decorative entrance. It was built like a reinforced security vault. The door was framed with thick iron brackets and secured from the outside by 3 massive, hand-forged slide bolts, all completely orange with deep, flaking rust. Curiosity instantly gave way to an intuitive cold dread. Why would a domestic attic room require triple iron locks on the outside? Clara retrieved a heavy iron crowbar from her toolkit. The sound of the iron tearing through the rusted bolts rang out through the silent house like a series of gunshot echoes. With a heavy, agonizing groan of iron hinges, the door swung inward. The air that rushed out of the sealed space was not merely stale, it was frigid, thick with the smell of old paper, stagnant moisture, and a faint, sickly sweet scent resembling dried lilies mixed with iron. Clara stepped inside, her flashlight beam cutting through 70 years of undisturbed darkness. The room was tiny, no larger than 8 feet by 8 feet. There were no windows. The walls were thick, sound-dampening horsehair plaster, heavily gouged and scratched near the floor level. The room contained only 3 items: a small iron cot with a rotted straw-filled mattress, a simple wooden wash basin, and a single leather-bound journal resting on a small stool. Clara approached the cot with trembling breath. As she raised her light to the wall above the bed frame, her heart seized. Scratched directly into the plaster with what appeared to be a dull nail or bare human fingernails were hundreds of crude, repetitive tallies. Beside them, written in a shaky, childish scrawl, was a name repeated over and over again. Alice. 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 Clara had no relative named Alice. Her family genealogy, meticulously documented back to the 1850s, listed her grandmother as an only child. There was no record, no photograph, no mention of Alice in any family census or obituary. With cold sweat pooling at the base of her neck, Clara picked up the leather-bound journal from the stool. The pages were brittle, yellowed, and stained. The first entry was dated October 14, 1948. The handwriting belonged to Clara's great-grandmother, Margaret.
As Clara read through the faded ink, a nightmare of medical shame, societal fear, and cold, calculated cruelty began to unfold. Alice was Margaret's second daughter, Clara's great-aunt. Alice had been born with severe physical deformities and a profound neurological condition that caused her to suffer violent, uncontrollable night terrors and vocalization fits. In the conservative high society circles of New England in the 1940s, having a child with such severe conditions was viewed by the elite family not as a medical tragedy, but as a catastrophic stain on their moral reputation, a mark of corrupted blood that would destroy their standing and marriage prospects for the rest of the lineage. Instead of seeking medical asylum or public care, Margaret and her husband made a horrifying decision. They constructed the reinforced room in the deepest wing of the attic. They faked an infant death certificate, held a closed, empty casket memorial for the community, and quietly brought 6-year-old Alice up the stairs. She was locked inside the 8x8 room. She was erased from the living world while she was still breathing inside it. For 12 years, Alice lived in total darkness. The journal detailed the routine with terrifying clinical detachment. Margaret wrote about bringing meals up twice a day under the cover of night, cleaning the room while her daughter lay curled under the thin blanket, and ignoring the desperate, wordless cries that echoed against the horsehair plaster when the house was asleep. The most horrific entries belonged to Clara's aunt, Eleanor, the aunt who had lived in the house until her death in 2021. Eleanor had been a teenager while Alice was locked above her head. The journal revealed that Eleanor was the only one who occasionally sneaked up to the attic with stolen books and small wooden toys, sitting outside the heavy iron door, whispering to her hidden sister through the narrow gap in the floorboards. The final entry in the journal was dated November 3, 1960. Margaret's handwriting was rushed, erratic. She wrote, "The coughing has ceased. Her fever broke hours ago, but her breath is gone. God forgive us, but the silence in the house tonight is a mercy. We buried her beneath the flagstones of the root cellar before dawn. No one knows. No one will ever know." Alice had died alone in the dark at 18 years old, succumbing to an untreated lung infection while her family dined 2 floors beneath her. Clara stood in the suffocating silence of the small attic room, tears streaming down her face as the weight of 70 years of hidden torture washed over her. Her entire family history, their wealth, their poise, their refined heritage, was built directly over the grave of a child they had locked away like an infectious disease. Clara did not sleep that night. She sat in the grand living room beneath the portraits of her great-grandparents, unable to look at their painted, distinguished faces without seeing the iron bolts on the attic door. At 3:15 a.m., as a heavy squall hit the house, Clara heard a sound that made her blood turn to ice. It was coming from the ceiling directly above her head, the unmistakable, rhythmic sound of small, bare feet dragging across the floorboards of the attic, accompanied by a soft, raspy, childlike voice humming a forgotten nursery rhyme. Alice had not left the house. Her body had been buried in the cold dirt of the root cellar, but her memory and the lingering, tormented shadow of her existence was finally breathing the air her family had denied her for 3 generations.
Some family secrets do not involve a victim hiding away in a dark room. They involve a predator hiding in plain sight, wearing the mask of a loving parent. Our second account comes from a man named David, a high school history teacher from Ohio, who spent 32 years believing his father, Arthur, was the epitome of civic virtue, quiet humility, and parental devotion. Arthur was an idolized figure in his small Midwestern town. He was a decorated military veteran, an active deacon at the local church, and a retired mechanical engineer who spent his weekends organizing charity drives and building wooden toys for orphanages. To David, Arthur was a pillar of strength, a patient, soft-spoken man who had raised him single-handedly after his mother passed away from cancer in the late 1990s. In the spring of 2023, Arthur passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 81. David, grieving the loss of his hero, returned to his childhood home to organize his father's estate and prepare the house for sale. Arthur was an extraordinarily organized man. Every financial ledger, tax form, and appliance manual was neatly filed in alphabetical order inside his immaculate home office. However, while clearing out the workshop in the concrete basement, a room Arthur had kept strictly locked throughout David's childhood under the guise of dangerous heavy machinery safety, David found a heavy steel security safe embedded directly into the foundation wall behind a pegboard of hand tools. It took David 3 days to locate the combination, which he eventually found written in code inside his father's old military service manual. When the heavy steel door of the safe swung open, David expected to find land deeds, vintage coins, or perhaps silver war medals. Instead, he found a collection of dark, carefully organized evidence that instantly destroyed his reality, his identity, and every memory he had ever cherished with his father. Inside the safe were 12 identical black leather binders, each labeled with a date range spanning from 1978 to 1998, alongside 3 heavy industrial steel film canisters and a velvet-lined wooden box. David pulled out the first binder, dated 1982, the year before he was born. As he opened the pages, his breath hitched in his throat. The binder contained hundreds of high-resolution black and white photographs taken with a professional telephoto lens. They were surveillance shots of young women walking to their cars after work, entering their apartments, sitting alone in diners. Glued beneath each photograph were detailed, hand-typed logs detailing the women's daily routines, their work schedules, their vehicle license plates, and the layout of their ground floor windows. With cold terror gripping his chest, David pulled out the wooden velvet box. He lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of small personal items, each stored in individual plastic bags labeled with dates and location coordinates. Delicate silver necklaces, driver's licenses belonging to women from 3 different states, single earrings, and small locks of hair tied with black thread. David's mind reeled into violent shock. He was staring at a trophy box. He pulled down the film canisters and rushed up to his father's office, loading the old 16mm film reel into Arthur's vintage projector. He pointed the lens at the white wall of the living room and hit the power switch. The mechanical hum of the projector filled the silent room. As the dust particles danced in the beam of light, the image materialized on the wall. It was not a family home movie. The video footage, shot in low-light infrared, showed a dimly lit, reinforced room with concrete walls. Tied to a heavy wooden chair in the center of the frame was a young woman, her eyes wide with unimaginable primal terror. Then, a figure stepped into the frame from the shadows. The man was wearing a crude, handmade leather mask with narrow eye slits, but his build, his distinct mechanical posture, and the deep surgical precision of his movements were unmistakable. It was David's father. David watched in paralyzed horror as the man he had called Dad, the man who had held him when he cried, who had taught him how to ride a bicycle, who had prayed with him before dinner, demonstrated a cold, sadistic, methodical cruelty that belonged to a high-level, unpunished serial predator. Between 1978 and 1998, while acting as a devoted husband and community leader, Arthur had operated a parallel life as an elusive, highly organized killer who targeted young women across the Midwest. His job as a field engineer allowed him to travel frequently, providing the perfect cover for his hunting trips. His strict, locked workshop in the basement wasn't a workshop. It was where he processed his trophies and planned his logistical routes. David collapsed onto the living room floor, surrounded by the projected light of his father's crimes, vomiting from the sheer crushing weight of the revelation. The horror for David was not the sudden threat of violence. Arthur was dead, his body already buried in the town cemetery with military honors. The horror was the complete, violent contamination of his own soul. Every memory David possessed was instantly rewritten through a sickening, terrifying lens. He remembered the late-night work trips his father took, returning home with small gifts and toys for David. Were those toys bought with money taken from his victims? He remembered his father meticulously teaching him how to tie complex utility knots for camping, the exact same knots David had just seen used on the chair in the projector footage. He remembered the times his father would sit quietly on the porch, staring into the dark with a calm, gentle smile. He had thought his father was reflecting on a peaceful life. He now realized his father was mentally reliving the agonizing screams of human beings he had buried in unmarked graves across 3 states. David did not keep the secret. Within 24 hours, David contacted the state police and the FBI. Over the next 6 months, David's childhood home became an active, major crime scene. Federal forensic teams dug up portions of the basement floor, extracting structural evidence that linked Arthur to at least 9 cold case disappearances that had baffled law enforcement for over 40 years. The news shattered the small Midwestern town. The local church removed Arthur's name from their donor plaque. The Veterans Hall quietly erased his record. For David, the sentence is a permanent psychological imprisonment. He changed his name, moved to a different state, and severed ties with his extended family. But you cannot run from your own blood. Every time David looks into the mirror, he sees his father's jawline, his father's eyes, and his father's posture staring back at him. The dark family secret he uncovered was not just that his father was a monster. It was the horrifying realization that the gentle, loving man he had worshipped for 30 years never existed at all. It was all a mask, a human shield used by a predator to hide in plain sight behind a happy home. Our final account moves beyond the dark realities of human cruelty and criminal deceit, diving into a nightmare that is passed down through the very genetic code of a family line, an inherited terror that waits patiently across generations for its time to collect. This account comes from a man named Julian, the last male heir of the once prominent Vance family, whose ancestral roots run deep into the coastal regions of the Pacific Northwest. For generations, the Vance family was renowned for their extraordinary, almost unnatural prosperity. Despite economic depressions, agricultural blights, and industrial shifts, the Vance estate had consistently accumulated vast wealth, shipping empires, and real estate holdings since the late 1800s. They were viewed as a blessed lineage, a family touched with unprecedented good fortune. However, this public fortune was balanced by a strange, dark pattern of private tragedy that plagued the family's male heirs. Every third generation, without exception, the eldest son of the Vance line would undergo a sudden, profound psychological collapse upon reaching his 33rd birthday. They would retreat into isolation, suffer from severe, wasting physical illnesses that baffled physicians, and inevitably disappear without a trace, leaving behind vacant estates and terrified families. Julian had grown up hearing these stories dismissed as tragic family lore, a genetic predisposition to early-onset dementia or neurological degeneration. In the winter of 2022, 2 months before his own 33rd birthday, Julian's father passed away from sudden cardiac arrest. As Julian was settling the family's estate inside the massive, isolated cliffside mansion known as Sentinel House, he uncovered a hidden compartment built into the floorboards of his father's private study. Inside the compartment sat a heavy, iron-bound ledger dating back to 1884, wrapped in rotting oil-soaked canvas. The ledger belonged to Julian's great-great-grandfather, Jeremiah Vance, the founder of the family's vast commercial fortune. Julian sat by the fire as a winter storm battered the coastal cliffs outside and began to read the fading, ink-scrawled pages of his ancestors' personal journal. What he discovered was not a record of hard work, business ingenuity, or industrial success. It was the detailed, terrifying documentation of a dark pact made in the cold, unmapped coastal woods of Oregon in the autumn of 1884. Jeremiah wrote about his early failures, his impending financial ruin, and his desperate encounter with an ancient, non-human entity that inhabited a deep, subterranean sea cave beneath the cliffs of Sentinel House. An entity known in the local native legends as the Weaver in the Salt. Jeremiah's journal described the compact in chilling, legalistic detail. The entity promised unprecedented wealth, protection from failure, and political influence to Jeremiah and his lineage for generations. It would ensure that the Vance name dominated the region, turning every venture into gold. But the price was not paid in coin. The covenant required an ancestral tithe, a debt of blood and consciousness. Every third generation, on the midnight of his 33rd birthday, the primary male heir of the Vance bloodline was bound by contract to descend into the subterranean sea cave beneath the house and present himself to the entity as an offering, renewing the pact for the next century of prosperity. Jeremiah wrote, "It does not take the life, it takes the seat of the soul. It inhabits the bloodline. We are not owners of this wealth. We are merely fattened cattle bred for its consumption. God have mercy on my great-great-grandson, for he will carry the final weight of my ambition." Julian stared at the yellowed pages, his hands trembling violently as the cold realization settled into his bones. He calculated the timeline. Jeremiah made the pact in 1884. The first heir was taken in 1917. The second heir disappeared in 1950. Julian was the third-generation heir, and his 33rd birthday was 48 hours away. Over the next 2 days, Julian tried to convince himself that the ledger was the product of a madman's imagination, a psychological delusion written by a senile ancestor. He packed his bags, intending to drive away from Sentinel House, to leave the coast, to leave the country entirely. But on the night before his birthday, the physical manifestations began. It started with a low-frequency, vibrating hum that echoed not through the house, but directly inside Julian's teeth and temporal bones. A rhythmic, wet, pulsing sound that mimicked the heavy rise and fall of a massive, submerged tide beneath the floorboards. Then came the auditory hallucinations. When Julian stepped toward the front door to leave, the dead air of the hallway was filled with a soft, raspy, wet, whispering sound coming from the cold air vents.
The voice was not speaking a modern language. It was reciting a rhythmic, ancient sequence of names. The names of his grandfather, his great-grandfather, and finally, his own full name, Julian Vance. Driven by a sudden, irresistible neurological compulsion that overwhelmed his physical motor control, Julian dropped his car keys. His legs, moving with an eerie mechanical rigidity, turned away from the front door and walked toward the basement archives. He unlocked the heavy oak door that led down to the natural stone cellars beneath Sentinel House. There, hidden behind a rotting wine rack, was a narrow vertical fissure in the coastal granite, a dark, wet tunnel that descended directly into the cliffside below, where the ocean roared in the absolute darkness. The air rising from the fissure was freezing, thick with the smell of brine, decaying kelp, and a dark, copper-like stench of ancient blood. Julian stood at the mouth of the abyss, fighting with every ounce of his conscious mind to turn back, to scream, to run into the night. But his body was no longer entirely his own. The compact made in 1884 was written into his very DNA. His nerve fibers were responding to the frequency echoing from the depths of the sea cave. From the pitch-black void beneath the floorboards, 2 small, pale, self-illuminating points of light slowly rose through the dark. Eyes that had waited 100 years for the final payment of the Vance bloodline. A voice, wet, heavy, and echoing with the sound of crushing water, whispered from the fissure. "The lease has expired, Julian. Come down and pay the debt of your fathers." Julian was found 3 days later by local police after his attorney reported him missing. He was discovered sitting on the edge of the coastal cliffs near Sentinel House, staring out at the empty gray ocean. He was physically alive, but the man named Julian was gone. His hair had turned chalk white, his eyes were completely vacant, staring into the distance without blinking, and his vocal cords could produce only a low, rhythmic, wet clicking sound that mimicked the rising tide. The family wealth remains intact, sitting in high-yield trust accounts for a bloodline that has reached its terrifying, silent end. The secret was not a hidden crime or a buried child. It was the horrifying truth that some families do not own their success. They are merely host bodies for ancient debts that will always, inevitably, come home
to collect. A child locked away in an attic to preserve a family's pride. A serial predator hiding behind the loving smile of a father. An ancestral compact that harvested the minds of its own heirs. 3 separate lives, 3 separate bloodlines, all bound by the absolute horror of the secrets we keep to protect our pride, our wealth, or our sanity. They serve as a terrifying, undeniable reminder that the human spirit is capable of constructing elaborate, beautiful lies to cover the most horrific truths. We build pristine homes, we print glossy family albums, and we toast to the honor of our ancestors, all while walking on top of floorboards that conceal the decaying bones of our real history. The next time you visit your family home or sit around a table listening to old stories passed down through generations, pay attention to the details that are left unsaid. Look closely at the smiling faces in those old yellowed photographs. Pay attention to that locked door at the end of the hallway that no one ever opens, and ask yourself, what did your family have to bury so that you could stand here today? If this deep dive into the dark history of bloodlines made your skin crawl, shatter that like button right now to feed the algorithm and keep the Prince of Darkness army growing. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a classified archive. Now I want to hear from you. Head down to the comments and tell me, what is the most unsettling or unexplained secret you have ever uncovered about your own family history? Let me know. I read and analyze every single comment. Until next time, keep your flashlight charged. Don't open the locked doors in the attic, and whatever you do, don't look into the family crypt. Good night.